Welcome back to another explainer. All right, we are jumping right in today because we've got a seriously fascinating historical and biblical deep dive lined up for you. We're going to look at two very distinct guys, men who lived hundreds of years apart, but, they're permanently tied together in the historical record by two really specific things. First, they share the exact same name, and second, they share an incredibly tragic destiny. It's literally a tale of two Abirams. And as we dig into their stories today, we're going to uncover some wild ironies and, honestly, some pretty sobering truths about the choices we make and the consequences that follow. Let's get into it.
So let's start with the name itself, Abiram. It's a Hebrew name, and it carries this incredibly beautiful, grand meaning. It translates to exalted father. Now, when you hear a name like that, you immediately expect greatness, right? I mean, you expect a lineage of honor, maybe some royalty, or at the very least, a patriarch who leaves behind this massively celebrated legacy. You give a kid this name expecting them to totally rise to the occasion and become someone, well, truly exalted.
But here is the million-dollar question. If the name literally means exalted father, why is it that in the entire biblical record, this specific name is exclusively associated with wrath, judgment, and just spectacular failure? I mean, there's no other way to say it. Neither of the men who bore this name in Scripture achieved anything even remotely close to exaltation. Actually, it's the exact opposite. Their lives became these enduring case studies in exactly what not to do. It's this profound irony. And to really wrap our heads around how that happened, we need to look at their individual stories. All right, part 1, Rebellion in the Wilderness. Let's head back to the dusty, chaotic era of the Israelites wandering in the wilderness. This is where we meet our first case study, Abiram the Reubenite. If you check out the book of Numbers, specifically chapter 16, he's introduced as the son of Eliab from the tribe of Reuben. But spoiler alert, he is not mentioned for his quiet faith or his stellar leadership skills. Nope. History remembers him as an active, outspoken co-conspirator. Basically, he teamed up with his brother Dathan and a guy named Korah to stage a full-blown rebellion. And their target? The leadership of Moses and the priesthood of Aaron. They weren't just whining about a few administrative decisions here. They were actively challenging the entire divinely appointed structure of the camp. Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer brazen insolence of their argument. I mean, it is wild. When Moses actually summons Abiram and Dathan to come talk, they flat out refuse. They send back this incredibly sarcastic message saying, "We will not come. Isn't it enough that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness?" Do you catch the profound insult there? A land flowing with milk and honey. That was the famous, beautiful description of the promised land God was leading them toward. But Abiram totally twists it. He uses that exact phrase to describe Egypt, the place of their brutal slavery. They essentially accused Moses of dragging them out of paradise just to let them die in the desert. Ultimately, they were grumbling not just against Moses, but directly against the Lord himself. And because they grumbled against God like that, the response wasn't just, a standard military defeat or some natural illness. It was a highly specific, totally supernatural judgment. Here's how it goes down. First, the earth literally opens up beneath them. Then, Korah, Dathan, and Abiram go down alive into the realm of the dead, taking literally everything they owned right down with them. And then, the earth simply closes back over them. It's just absolute finality. The source material really emphasizes this point. The earth closing back up confirmed without a shadow of a doubt that this was a deliberate supernatural act of judgment. But wow, the tragedy does not stop with just Abiram. 250. That is the number of co-conspirators who died in the ensuing aftermath. When Abiram chose to jump on board with Korah's rebellion, he didn't just write his own death sentence. He brought destruction upon his entire family, and that ripple effect ultimately claimed the lives of 250 other men. It's a staggering reality, isn't it? It's a harsh reminder that defiance rarely claims just one single victim. Okay, let's move on to part 2, the curse of Jericho. We are fast-forwarding the narrative a bit to the era of the kings, specifically during the rule of King Ahab. And this is where we meet the second Abiram in the biblical record, Abiram the Bethelite. He gets a super brief mention over in the book of 1 Kings. He's the firstborn son of a man named Hiel. Now, unlike our first Abiram, who was this active, loud, vocal rebel, this second Abiram seems to be a much more passive figure in the grand scheme of the story. The spotlight is actually fixed on his father, Hiel, because Hiel makes the fateful, completely disastrous decision to try and restore the wicked, destroyed city of Jericho to its original condition.
Now let's walk through exactly why Hiel's decision was so catastrophic. Generations earlier, right after the Israelites miraculously conquered Jericho, Joshua pronounced a chilling prophecy. He said that the man who undertook the rebuilding of the city would lay its foundation at the cost of his firstborn and set up its gates at the cost of his youngest. Fast forward centuries later, and Hiel starts to rebuild. And, exactly as prophesied, his firstborn son, Abiram, dies as the foundation is laid. Then, when the city is finally finished and the gates are set up, Hiel's youngest son, Segub, dies. It is terrifyingly accurate. Hiel literally sacrificed the lives of his sons to restore a city that God had already condemned.
Which brings us to part 3, the cost of disobedience. So we've looked at 2 very different historical accounts today. 2 men living centuries apart under totally wildly different circumstances. Let's compare them side by side for a second. On one hand, you've got Abiram the Reubenite. His doom was brought about by active defiance. He made a conscious, direct choice to grumble, mock, and rebel against the Lord's appointed leadership. But on the other hand, you have Abiram the Bethelite. His fate was an inherited judgment. He died as a direct consequence of his father Hiel's blatant disregard for God's prophetic curse. One was totally active, the other was basically collateral damage. Yet tragically, the end result for both men was identically fatal.
And that really brings us to the core takeaways from the source material. These are the inevitable ripple effects of defiance. First off, rebellion against God and His word inevitably leads to death. Second, and this is crucial, it isn't just about losing a physical life. The text really emphasizes that disobedience carries severe eternal repercussions. And finally, defiance never ever happens in a vacuum. It deeply and profoundly affects families and entire communities. Think about it. The first Abraham took his family and 250 men down with him. The second Abraham lost his life because of his father's stubborn pride. Our choices absolutely bleed into the lives of the people around us.
So that leaves us with a final, pre-provocative thought to ponder today. If it's really true that our choices create inevitable ripple effects, if defiance doesn't just happen in a vacuum, then what kind of legacy is your obedience or your disobedience building for your family right now? Are you laying a foundation for an exalted father? Or are you rebuilding walls that really should be left in the past? Just something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today. Keep learning, keep reflecting, and we will see you next time.